Presidential candidate for Bolivia's movement towards socialism, Luis Arce, has cast his vote in the country's general elections. The indigenous and rural mobilization, known as a minga, continued its march towards Colombia's capital Bogota on Saturday, while demanding an official meeting with President Ivan Duque. Polls opened in the first round of Guinea's presidential election this Sunday, with incumbent President Alpha Condé standing for a third term. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. Presidential candidate for Bolivia's movement towards socialism, Luis Arce, and favourite to win, has cast his vote in the country's general elections being held this Sunday. At 7 a.m. local time, the Supreme Electoral Tribunal inaugurated the 2020 general elections from its headquarters in La Paz. De facto President Janine Áñez and her government minister Arturo Murillo were in attendance. The stakes are very high in these elections, which come after the coup against President Evo Morales last year and the repeated delays to the vote. More than 7 million people are eligible to vote this Sunday. As part of the measures to prevent the spread of the coronavirus, voters have been divided into two groups, according to their identity card numbers, to cast their ballots. The general elections will determine the president and vice president of the country, in addition to 36 senators, 130 lawmakers, and 9 representatives of suprastate bodies. And just 12 hours before the elections, Bolivia's electoral authorities announced on Saturday night that they had scrapped the quick vote counting method in the first round being held this Sunday, known as the new system of dissemination of preliminary results, following criticism from electoral observers about a lack of transparency. The Supreme Electoral Tribunal had planned to implement the new rapid results system created specifically for the October 18th vote, but Tribunal President Salvador Romero reported that the suspension had been determined because the test conducted did not allow for a secure count. Meanwhile, international observers have stressed that the elections are being overseen by an administration that is hostile to the majority party. And the representative of the Inter-American Union of Electoral Organizations observation mission to the Bolivian general elections, Pamela San Martin, referred to the decision of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal regarding the vote counting method.
We understand the decision the Supreme Electoral Tribunal has made. We understand that it is a decision made timely, prior to this transmission, which was in response to the concerns of citizens to favor certainty, to ensure that there is an adequate flow of electoral results and generate confidence amongst the citizenry. With a little more time, not with haste, but in an electoral process in which what has to be guaranteed above all is the certainty of the election results, which is precisely why we understand the decision that the Supreme Electoral Tribunal has adopted.
And several Bolivian political figures have condemned the Supreme Electoral Tribunal's decision to suspend the quick vote counting method, known as the new system of dissemination of preliminary results, following criticism from international observers about a lack of transparency. In a press release, lawmakers from the movement towards socialism demanded more explanations from the electoral authority, while representatives from the citizen community and the We Believe electoral alliances condemned the move. Meanwhile, representatives of the United Nations, European Union and the Catholic Church took note of the decision, while the observation mission of the Organization of American States approved the move. The Supreme Electoral Tribunal will now only publish the official results after the end of the complete vote count. And according to figures issued by Bolivia's Supreme Electoral Tribunal, over 300,000 Bolivian citizens residing abroad are eligible to cast their votes in this Sunday's general elections. Bolivian residents in Asia, Africa, Europe and Oceania have already attended the polls. According to electoral authorities, the first votes were cast in Asia, specifically in Japan, followed by China and South Korea, for a total of 260 voters in these 3 countries. Bolivians are set to cast their ballots in 30 countries, of which Argentina, Spain and Brazil are expected to see the largest number of voters. More than 71,000 Bolivians can exercise their right to vote in Bolivian diplomatic missions located in 4 continents. Electoral authorities have noted that the country's register of voters residing abroad decreased by 11.54% compared with last year's elections, following a verification process which has been criticised by several sectors. And during the inauguration of the general elections, the President of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, Salvador Romero, guaranteed reliable and clean results.
The process will require a patient attitude, but at the end of that effort, we will have a safe, reliable, and verifiable count. Faced with the impatience of waiting to know the data in a few hours, we have privileged the certainty of unquestionable results, on which we will position authorities that will govern for 5 years, and on which we will build the solid foundations of democracy. This election, the most complex in our democratic history, offers us an opportunity that we must fully assume as a society.
And Bolivia's de facto government minister, Arturo Morillo, has voiced threats against national and international observers, stating that they must not interfere with the electoral process.
And ask all those who have come from abroad to help us control the vote, those who have been endorsed by the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, and those who have not. Those who have been invited by the mass, also all are welcome. The only thing we ask is that they do not interfere.
And Bolivia's de facto president called on all Bolivians to cast their votes in the country's general elections this Sunday, while also announcing that national police forces would be deployed in order to guarantee a peaceful and safe election day.
We are going to have transparent, free elections without pressure. We have undertaken the respective coordination. Our armed forces, our national police, will be on the streets in favor of the Bolivian people. Unlike other times, they are not in favor of any political party. They are there simply to protect the security of the Bolivian people. It's going to be a peaceful day. I invite all Bolivians to comply with their duty. To go to the polls, we have the right to elect the authorities that are going to govern us over the next 5 years. The security is absolutely guaranteed.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The indigenous and rural mobilization known as a minga continued its march towards Colombia's capital Bogota on Saturday, while demanding an official meeting with President Ivan Duque. Over 5,000 indigenous people are heading to the city to demand an end to the escalating violence in the country, as well as social and political reforms. Several leaders of Colombian indigenous communities have noted the mobilization aims to denounce the ongoing massacres, assassinations of social leaders, and the criminalization of protests to defend their territory, democracy and peace, including their respect for the 2016 peace accords. Meanwhile, the caravan is set to make several stops along the 500-kilometer route and hold rallies in the cities of Armenia, Fusagasugá and Soacha. The march is expected to arrive in Bogota on October 19th and stay to participate in a nationwide protest and general strike planned for October 21st.
We believe that the president fears to give a public debate, and that makes it part of the arrogance and his inaptitude to govern this country. That's why he fears to face the indigenous people and different social sectors in the country about the several necessities and the wave of violence experienced in our country. In case he doesn't receive us in Bogota, we'll try to do the debate and then address to the country and come back to our regions to prepare more mobilizations, marches, but this time all nationwide.
The Venezuelan government has extended invitations to the most relevant international organizations to accompany the upcoming December legislative elections. Authorities note the invitations are a sign of good faith and transparency, but added that all international missions must respect the nation's electoral law.
A topic of debate in regards to the upcoming parliamentary elections in Venezuela has been the push for the participation of international observers from the European Union. They have been invited to the process but are reluctant to attend, arguing an alleged lack of guarantees, despite multiple organizations agreeing they have the necessary conditions.
The guarantees have stayed the same for the electoral process. They were debated in Oslo, then in Barbados, and we were always in agreement. These guarantees were in the conditional agreement reached by both sides.
Electoral authorities have invited multiple organizations to accompany December's vote, including the High Commissioner of Human Rights, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and the governments of China, South Africa, Russia, among others. The profiles of those who agreed to take part varies between electoral experts, diplomats, journalists, academics, social leaders, and others. International observing missions gained traction during the 1990s and would focus on countries that were transitioning into democracy after years of dictatorships. In this way, many see these missions as an imposition of a global North perspective on internal affairs, as Eurocentric institutions must be allowed to validate the will of citizens. Recently, Venezuela modified its legislation to incorporate international monitoring, defined as a process of accompaniment instead of observation, based on sovereignty, self-determination, non-interference, and respect for internal electoral decisions.
There must be a lot of consideration over the legitimacy that these observing missions are given, because they could work to set up false flag attacks or coup attempts. Even though they should never be involved in these situations, they need to be independent in their work and their beliefs.
Organizations that are behind electoral observing missions say they help increase the public's trust in the electoral process and are led by principles of objectivity, impartiality, and non-interference. But these principles are often set aside, and observing missions have been known to generate great damage to democracy, as we seen last year in Bolivia with the actions of the OAS. Between 2016 and 2018, the National Electoral Council developed more than 10 electoral accompaniment programs, welcoming more than 2,000 companions from various continents. These include the Union of South American Nations, UNASUR, the Southern Common Market, MERCOSUR, the Inter-American Union of Electoral Bodies, UNIORE, the Council of Latin American Electoral Experts, and the United States National Union of Lawyers, as well as the OAS and the Carter Center.
We come to offer respectful companionship to the internal process, but we will be very demanding with the audits, with the norms, and will make sure that all rules are followed. We will formulate recommendations ahead of the elections as well as afterwards, and we will tell the people and the international community the results of our work.
Electoral observation missions who arrive in Venezuela will not be there to provide some kind of legitimacy to the process, but will allow citizens and political players to have more trust in the process.
New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern secured a landslide victory in the country's general elections held on Saturday. Prime Minister Ardern's centre-left Labour Party won 49.1% of the vote, thus securing 64 of the 120 seats in Parliament. Meanwhile, the opposition centre-right National Party secured 26.8% of the vote, representing 35 seats. No party had managed to win an outright parliamentary majority in New Zealand since it introduced a voting system known as mixed member proportional representation in 1996. Prime Minister Ardern has voiced the possibility of forming a coalition government, despite securing a historic victory that will enable her Labour Party to govern alone. The election was originally set to be held in September, but was postponed by a month after a renewed COVID-19 outbreak in the country.
My expectation is that we will form government within the next 2 to 3 weeks. There is precedent for governments to be formed before final counts are taken, when it's clear that a mandate exists. And it is clear in this case that a mandate exists for that.
This Sunday, tens of thousands of young people took to the streets of Thailand's capital Bangkok for a 5th day of protest demanding sweeping political change in defiance of the country's state of emergency. The protesters claim that Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, who is an army commander who led a 2014 coup that toppled an elected government, was returned to power unfairly in last year's general elections because the laws had been changed to favour a pro-military party. They argue that the country's constitution, established under military rule and passed in a referendum in which campaigning against it was illegal, is undemocratic. The protest movement is also calling for reform of the Thai monarchy.
If we are together, we have chance more to win. But if we let people fight alone, there will be less chance to win. So we are here to express ourselves what we are wanting and what we are expecting for the future as well. The most important signal is this. This means we have to go home, we have to run. This is a danger.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. This Sunday, polls opened in the first round in Guinea's presidential election, with incumbent President Alpha Condé standing for a third term. Nearly 5 million voters are eligible to cast their ballots in the election, in which President Alpha Condé faces 11 challengers, of whom former Prime Minister Cellou Dalein Diallo is his strongest rival. President Condé is seeking to extend his mandate after the country's constitution was changed earlier this year, allowing him to run for a third term. The two main presidential candidates draw their support from Guinea's largest two ethnic groups, with the possibility that the results will aggravate ethnic tensions in the country.
This vote is important because it will allow world opinion to see how mature Guinea is. It can somewhat confirm our maturity in terms of democracy and society. That is why this vote is very important for us. I have no worries. Everything will be fine. I'm sure it will. You have seen, look, we are all here in peace and it will continue. All we wish is that the election go well and that after the result we continue our lives as before.
A suicide car bombing killed at least 13 people and wounded more than 100 others in Afghanistan's western Ghor province on Sunday. According to the head of a local hospital, emergency staff were treating dozens of people with both serious and minor injuries, while the death toll was expected to rise. Interior Ministry spokesman Tariq Aran said the car bombing struck near the entrance of the provincial police chief's office and other nearby government buildings. No group immediately claimed responsibility for the bombing, which comes amid an increase in attacks by the Taliban, as representatives of the group and Afghan government officials hold their first ever face-to-face talks in Qatar, where the Taliban have had a political office for many years.
Unfortunately, as a result of the horrific incident which happened today, a number of people were martyred and wounded. 13 dead bodies and 105 wounded victims were brought to the hospital. 15 serious wounded victims were operated since their arrival, and 5 others are waiting for their operations. We were inside the police chief's office on the 4th floor when suddenly an explosion happened. All the glass from the windows fell on us, and I got wounded. I came down to the compound, and then we were evacuated to hospital.
And on Sunday, Afghanistan's chief peace envoy Abdullah arrived in Tehran for talks with senior Iranian officials on his country's ongoing peace process. Abdullah arrived in the Iranian capital for a 3-day visit, where he will meet with a host of officials, including President Hassan Rouhani and Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif. Beforehand, Abdullah visited Pakistan and India, where he discussed the Afghan peace process with senior officials. His trip comes amid ongoing peace negotiations between the Afghan government and the Taliban. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.